The millionaire went to buy bread, and when he saw the cleaner's ring, he began to break out in a cold sweat. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Bristol's St. Nicholas Market as Alexander Blackwood navigated through the bustling crowd. At 46, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his salt and pepper hair adding a distinguished air to his appearance. This impromptu visit to the market hadn't been part of his scheduled business trip, but something about the historic building's Victorian architecture had caught his eye as he'd passed by in his chauffeur-driven car. The market's interior was a maze of colorful stalls and shops, filled with the animated chatter of vendors and customers. Alexander found himself oddly at peace here, away from the sterile environment of corporate boardrooms and PowerPoint presentations. As he wandered past displays of antiques and local crafts, his BlackBerry buzzed incessantly in his pocket, but for once, he chose to ignore it. A young woman was cleaning the windows of one of the boutiques, her movements precise and efficient. She couldn't have been more than 20, her dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail, her uniform bearing the logo of a local cleaning service. Alexander might have walked past without a second glance, but something caught his eye. A flash of green on her right hand as she wiped the glass in circular motions. He stopped abruptly, causing a fellow shopper to bump into him with a muttered apology. The ring on the young woman's finger was unmistakable, an emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds in a distinctive Art Deco setting. His heart began to race as memories flooded back, memories of a warm summer evening 21 years ago, when he'd given that exact ring to Catherine Spencer. The coincidence seemed impossible. That ring had been unique, custom-made by an elderly jeweler in Bath who had since retired. Alexander had spent 3 months' salary on it, back when he was just starting his career. He remembered Catherine's face when he'd presented it to her, her blue eyes lighting up with joy, her blonde hair catching the last rays of sunset. "Excuse me," he found himself saying before he could stop himself. The young woman turned, and Alexander felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. Her eyes, they were exactly like Catherine's, the same shade of blue that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. "Yes, sir," she asked politely, lowering her cleaning cloth. Her accent was pure Bristol, just like Catherine's had been. "That ring," Alexander managed to say, his mouth suddenly dry. "It's quite unusual. May I ask where you got it?" The young woman glanced at her hand, her expression becoming guarded. "It was my mum's," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. "She gave it to me for my 20th birthday last month." Alexander's world tilted on its axis. 20 years. The timing aligned perfectly with his last meeting with Catherine, just before he'd left for that career-making opportunity in Singapore. They'd planned to meet one last time, but he'd been called away suddenly for an emergency meeting with investors. He'd tried to reach her afterward, but she'd changed her number, moved flat, seemingly vanished into thin air. "Your mother," he said slowly. "Would her name happen to be Catherine Spencer?" The young woman's eyes widened slightly before narrowing with suspicion. "How do you know my mum?" Before Alexander could respond, a sharp voice cut through the market's ambient noise. "Emily, your break started 5 minutes ago. You should be having your lunch." The young woman, Emily, quickly stepped back from the window. "Sorry, Mrs. Roberts. I'm going now." She gave Alexander one last curious look before hurrying away, leaving him standing there, his mind whirling with implications. Back in his hotel room that evening, Alexander sat in the dark, his laptop screen providing the only illumination. The search results for Catherine Spencer Bristol showed several entries, but one immediately caught his eye. "Dr. Catherine Spencer, DMD, Clifton Dental Practice." The professional headshot showed an older version of the woman he'd known, but her eyes still held that same sparkle, even in the formal photograph. He opened his briefcase and pulled out an old leather wallet he'd carried for years. Behind his credit cards and business cards in a hidden compartment lay a small photograph, its edges worn soft with age. It showed him and Catherine on their last holiday together in Cornwall, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. He held it next to the website photo, comparing the images across the decades. His hands trembling slightly, Alexander reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus, it's Alexander Blackwood. Remember that favor you owe me? I need your investigative services. It's personal this time." Chapter 2. Hidden Truths. Marcus Shaw's preliminary report arrived 3 days later, while Alexander was supposed to be focusing on a crucial merger negotiation. Instead, he found himself reading and rereading the document in his temporary office at the Bristol branch, his coffee growing cold beside him. Emily Catherine Spencer, born 20th of May 2004 at St. Michael's Hospital, Bristol. Mother, Dr. Catherine Ann Spencer. Father, listed as unknown. Currently enrolled at the University of Bristol, studying pre-medical sciences. Working part-time as a cleaner to support her studies. Lives with her mother in a modest but well-maintained house in Clifton. The report included more details about Catherine's life over the past 2 decades. After completing her dental degree, she'd established herself as one of Bristol's most respected dentists. She'd never married, dedicating herself to her practice and raising Emily. The report noted that Emily's maternal uncle, Robert Spencer, had played a significant role in her upbringing. Alexander's eyes lingered on a scanned newspaper clipping from a local Bristol paper, dated 2022, Local Student Wins Regional Art Competition. The photograph showed Emily, slightly younger, standing proudly beside a striking oil painting. She had Catherine's smile, but there was something in her jawline, the set of her shoulders, that Alexander recognized from his own reflection. A soft knock at his office door startled him. His secretary entered with another envelope from Marcus. "This just arrived by courier, sir. Marked urgent." Inside were several photographs of what appeared to be a storage unit. Marcus's note explained that he'd tracked down Catherine's old flat and discovered she'd maintained a small storage space in the building's basement. The photographs showed boxes of papers, old furniture, and most significantly, a collection of letters, all addressed to Alexander at his Singapore address, none of them ever sent. Marcus had managed to obtain copies of several letters. Alexander's hand shook as he read the first one, dated September 2004. "Dear Alexander, our daughter was born today. She has your nose and my eyes. I wish you could see her. I wish I'd told you about her that day at the cafe, but you never showed up. When I heard you'd already left for Singapore, I understood that your career meant more to you than anything we might have had together. I'm not angry anymore. I just want you to know that we're okay. Emily is perfect, and I will give her everything she needs. She will never feel the absence of what she never had. Catherine." Another letter, this one from 2009. "Alexander, Emily asked about her father today. She's so bright, so curious about everything. I told her that sometimes people have different kinds of families, and that she has me and Uncle Robert, who loves her more than anything. I didn't tell her how I still wear your ring sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. I didn't tell her how I see you in her determination, in the way she never gives up until she understands something completely. I saw in the business news that your company has become one of the largest in Europe. I hope it was worth it. Catherine." The most recent letter was dated just 2 years ago. "Dear Alexander, I gave Emily your ring today. I told her it was a family heirloom, and in a way, I suppose it is. She wears it while she paints, says it helps her concentrate. You should see her art, Alexander. She has such talent, such vision, but she wants to be a doctor to help people. She works so hard, taking extra shifts cleaning to save for her studies. Sometimes I wonder if I was wrong to keep her from you all these years. But then I remember that morning at the cafe, waiting for hours, watching my tea grow cold as I rehearsed how to tell you about our baby. When you didn't come, when I learned you'd already left the country, I made a promise to myself and our unborn child that we would never need anyone who didn't need us. Emily is applying to medical school now. She'll make it on her own merit, just as I made my way. We've done well without you, Alexander. I hope you've done well without us. Catherine." Alexander placed the letters carefully back in the envelope, his vision blurring. Through his office window, he could see the spires of Bristol University where his daughter was currently studying. His daughter. The words felt foreign, yet right in his mind. He reached for his phone again. "Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about Emily's art. Every exhibition, every competition, every piece she's ever shown publicly. And I need you to be discreet. No one can know I'm looking into this." Chapter 3. First Steps. The Clifton dental practice stood in a converted Georgian townhouse, its cream-colored facade gleaming in the autumn sunshine. Alexander sat in his parked car across the street, watching patients come and go. He'd been there for nearly an hour, rehearsing what he might say, when he finally gathered the courage to walk through those elegant double doors. Marcus's latest report lay open on the passenger seat. It detailed Emily's artistic achievements, numerous local competitions, a scholarship to a summer art program in London, and most recently, a series of paintings displayed in a small gallery near the university. The report included photographs of her work, landscapes and portraits that showed remarkable talent, each signed with a simple ES in the corner. A movement caught his eye. Catherine was walking a patient to the door, her professional smile warm and genuine. She looked elegant in her white coat, her blonde hair now shorter than he remembered but still catching the light. For a moment, Alexander was transported back to their first meeting, when she'd been a dental student and he'd been a junior executive with dreams of changing the world. His phone buzzed, another message from his board of directors about the merger. He ignored it. Instead, he reached for the small notebook where he'd been jotting down everything he wanted to say to Catherine. The pages were filled with crossed-out sentences and false starts. Finally, taking a deep breath, Alexander stepped out of his car. The autumn wind whipped at his coat as he crossed the street. Through the practice's windows, he could see Catherine talking with her receptionist, completely unaware that her past was about to walk through the door. The reception area smelled of antiseptic and mint. A young woman at the desk looked up expectantly. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No," Alexander replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I need to speak with Dr. Spencer. It's about Emily." The receptionist's friendly expression turned cautious. "I'm sorry, but Dr. Spencer is fully booked today. If you'd like to make an appointment..." "Karen," Catherine's voice came from behind them. "Could you check Mrs. Henderson's..." She stopped mid-sentence as she recognized Alexander. The clipboard she was holding slipped from her fingers, clattering on the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Catherine's face had gone pale, but her voice was controlled when she finally broke the silence. "Karen, please cancel my 3 o'clock and hold my calls." She led Alexander to her private office, closing the door firmly behind them. The room was exactly what he would have expected from her. Organized, professional, with subtle personal touches like the watercolor paintings on the walls. With a start, he recognized Emily's distinctive style in one of them. "How did you find out?" Catherine asked without preamble, settling behind her desk like a queen preparing for battle. "I saw her at St. Nicholas Market," Alexander replied. "She was wearing my ring." "Your ring?" Catherine's laugh was bitter. "It stopped being your ring 20 years ago, when you decided your career was more important than keeping your promises. I tried to contact you after I left," Alexander protested. "You'd changed your number, moved flats." "Of course I did." Catherine's composure cracked slightly. "I spent 6 hours waiting for you at that cafe, Alexander. 6 hours trying to work up the courage to tell you about our baby. Then your secretary called to say you'd already left for Singapore. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone." Alexander sank into one of the patient chairs, suddenly feeling every one of his 46 years. "I didn't know, Catherine. About Emily, I didn't know. The meeting in Singapore was moved up suddenly. I tried to call, but your career came first. It always did." Catherine's fingers touched a framed photograph on her desk. Emily at her university acceptance ceremony, beaming proudly alongside her mother and a distinguished-looking man Alexander assumed was Robert Spencer. "She's extraordinary," Alexander said softly. "I've seen her artwork, and I know she's studying medicine." "She is extraordinary," Catherine agreed. "And she's achieved everything without your help. She doesn't need you now." "Perhaps not," Alexander acknowledged. "But I need her. I need to know my daughter. Please, Catherine, give me a chance to make things right." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those penetrating blue eyes that had haunted his dreams for 2 decades. Finally, she spoke. "Emily has a studio showing next week at the university. Small exhibition, student work only. Thursday evening, 7 o'clock in the Humanities Building Gallery." She paused. "I won't tell her you're coming. What you do with that information is up to you." Alexander stood, recognizing the dismissal in her tone. At the door, he turned back. "I never stopped loving you, Catherine, not really." Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's the problem, Alexander. Love was never our issue. It was trust." She turned to her computer screen. clearly ending the conversation. Please close the door on your way out. Chapter 4. The Art of Truth. The university gallery was smaller than Alexander had expected, but Emily's paintings dominated the space. Her work hung alongside that of other students, but her pieces drew the eye immediately. Vibrant landscapes that somehow managed to capture both reality and emotion, portraits that seemed to peer into the subject's souls. Alexander moved slowly through the room, carefully maintaining his distance from where Emily stood with a small group of admirers. She was wearing a simple black dress, her dark hair elegantly styled, looking every inch the accomplished young artist. The emerald ring caught the gallery lights as she gestured, explaining something about her technique to an elderly couple. "She's talented, isn't she?" A deep voice beside him made Alexander start. He turned to find himself face to face with Robert Spencer, whose photographs he'd seen in Marcus's reports. Emily's uncle was a tall man with graying temples and kind eyes that currently held no kindness for Alexander. "You must be Robert," Alexander said quietly, extending his hand. I know who you are," Robert interrupted, ignoring the offered handshake. "I was there when Catherine came home from that cafe 20 years ago. I helped her move flats when she couldn't bear to stay in a place filled with memories of you. I was in the delivery room when Emily was born, and I've been to every school play, every art show, every important moment of her life. Where were you?" Alexander lowered his hand. "I didn't know about her." "Would it have made a difference if you had?" Robert's voice was low but intense. "You were already on that plane to Singapore when Catherine was trying to tell you about her pregnancy. You'd made your choice." Before Alexander could respond, a burst of applause drew their attention. The gallery director was making an announcement. Emily's landscape series had just been selected for inclusion in a prestigious regional exhibition. Robert's expression softened as he watched his niece accept the congratulations of her peers. She did that on her own merit. No connections, no wealthy father opening doors. Just raw talent and hard work. "I'm not here to take credit for her achievements," Alexander said. "I just want to know her. And what happens when knowing her becomes inconvenient?" Robert turned to face him fully. "When it interferes with your next big business deal, will you disappear again? I'm not that person anymore. Aren't you? I saw your company's announcement about the merger you're handling. Quite a coup, according to the financial papers. Tell me, how long are you planning to stay in Bristol once the deal's done?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. He hadn't thought that far ahead. His focus had been entirely on finding Emily, on understanding the truth about his past. The future, his responsibilities, his commitments, seemed suddenly complicated in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Uncle Robert," Emily's voice cut through his thoughts. She was walking towards them, her face flushed with success and champagne. "The director wants to discuss displaying my work in the main gallery next term." She trailed off as she recognized Alexander from their encounter at the market. "Emily," Alexander breathed, but Robert stepped smoothly between them. "Congratulations, darling," he said, embracing his niece. "Your mother would be so proud if she could be here tonight." "She had that emergency patient," Emily said, but her eyes were fixed on Alexander over her uncle's shoulder. "I'm sorry. Do I know you? You're the man from the market, aren't you? The one who asked about my ring." Alexander opened his mouth, but no words came out. How did one begin such a conversation? "Hello, I'm your father," seemed simultaneously inadequate and overwhelming. "He was just leaving," Robert said firmly, his arm still protectively around Emily's shoulders. "Weren't you Mr. Blackwood?" Emily's eyes widened at the name. "Blackwood? As in Blackwood Industries? The company that's buying out half of Bristol's tech sector?" "Emily," Alexander tried again, but she was already backing away, her expression changing from confusion to dawning comprehension as she looked between the two men. "I need to speak to the director," she said quickly. "Excuse me." She turned and practically fled across the gallery, leaving Alexander standing there with the weight of Robert's disapproval bearing down on him. "Stay away from her," Robert said quietly. "She doesn't need you complicating her life. Not now. Not when she's finally starting to make her dreams come true." As Robert walked away, Alexander remained rooted to the spot, watching his daughter charm the gallery director with the same easy grace he remembered in her mother. The emerald ring on her finger caught the light again, a constant reminder of promises made and broken, of time lost, and truths hidden. Chapter 5. Shattered Illusions. Emily's hands shook as she unlocked the door to their Clifton home. The house was dark, but she could see light spilling from beneath her mother's study door. The gallery opening felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only hours. Her successful exhibition should have been cause for celebration. Instead, her mind whirled with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She'd spent the last hour researching Alexander Blackwood on her phone. His company's website painted a picture of unstoppable success, offices in 12 countries, revolutionary technological innovations, philanthropic initiatives across 3 continents. The man had his own Wikipedia page, for heaven's sake, and yet something about his face in the corporate photographs haunted her. She saw echoes of her own features in his strong jaw, the set of his eyes. "Mum," Emily called out, her voice unnaturally loud in the quiet house. "Are you awake?" The study door opened, and Catherine emerged, still wearing her work clothes. One look at her daughter's face told her everything she needed to know. "You saw him at the exhibition?" Emily felt her world tilt sideways. It wasn't a question. "You knew he was coming." Catherine sank into their worn leather sofa, suddenly looking exhausted. "He came to the practice today. He'd seen you at the market, recognized the ring. The ring you told me was a family heirloom." Emily's voice cracked as she pulled the emerald ring from her finger. It felt heavy, weighted with 2 decades of secrets. "Was anything you told me about my father true?" "Emily, please sit down." Catherine patted the space beside her. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" Emily remained standing, the ring clutched in her fist. "That my father isn't some nameless student who disappeared before I was born? That he's actually one of the wealthiest businessmen in Britain? That you've been lying to me my entire life?" "I was trying to protect you," Catherine began, but Emily cut her off. "Protect me? From what? From knowing that my father chose his career over us? That he's been living it up as some corporate giant while you worked yourself to exhaustion building your practice? While I've been cleaning offices to pay for art supplies?" Catherine stood, reaching for her daughter, but Emily stepped back. "It wasn't that simple, darling. We were so young and he was ambitious. When he left for Singapore." "Singapore?" Emily's eyes widened. "The business trip you always said was the last time you saw him. When was that exactly?" "The day I found out I was pregnant with you." Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. "I was going to tell him over coffee. I waited for hours, but he never came. His secretary called to say he'd already left the country." Emily felt her knees weaken and finally sank onto the sofa. "All those times I asked about him, you said you didn't know where he was. But he's been in the news, in magazines. His company's literally buying half the businesses in Bristol right now. By the time I realized how successful he'd become, you were already 10 years old. We had our life here with Uncle Robert. You were happy. I didn't want to complicate things." "Complicate things?" Emily laughed bitterly. "Like finding out the truth from Uncle Robert's reaction at my exhibition? Do you know how humiliating that was? Everyone at the gallery saw it. They'll all be talking about it tomorrow." Catherine moved to sit beside her daughter, carefully maintaining a small distance. "I should have told you when he came to the practice. I should have prepared you. But I was scared, Emily. Scared of exactly this reaction. Scared of losing you." "Losing me?" Emily turned to her mother, tears finally spilling over. "You're my mum. You're the one who was there for every scraped knee, every school play, every nightmare. You're the one who worked extra hours to buy me my first proper set of paints. He's just some stranger in an expensive suit." "A stranger who wants to know you," Catherine said softly. "He's seen your artwork. He knows you're studying medicine. He's been investigating me?" Emily stood up again, anger replacing hurt. "What gives him the right? He gave up any claim to my life 20 years ago. I don't need him now. I don't need his money or his connections or his guilty conscience." She placed the emerald ring on the coffee table, where it gleamed accusingly in the lamplight. "I have to go. I need to think." "Where are you going?" "It's late." Catherine's voice was worried. "To Uncle Robert's. At least he's been honest with me, even if it was only through his obvious hatred of Alexander Blackwood." Emily grabbed her coat and bag. At the door, she paused. "Did you ever stop loving him?" Catherine's silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought." Emily's voice was quiet. "You know what hurts the most? Not that he left, but that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. I'm not a child anymore, Mum. I could have handled it. We could have handled it together. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Catherine alone with an emerald ring and 20 years of memories she'd tried so hard to forget. Chapter 6. Unexpected Gestures. The university corridors seemed different now. Emily felt eyes following her as she made her way to her morning lectures, whispers trailing in her wake. News of Alexander Blackwood's appearance at her exhibition had spread like wildfire through the campus arts community. She'd already overheard 3 different versions of the story, each more dramatic than the last. She'd spent the weekend at Uncle Robert's flat, trying to process everything. He'd been supportive but firm in his opinion that Alexander Blackwood couldn't be trusted. Men like that, he'd said, they think money can fix anything, but some things can't be bought. Now, sitting in her advanced anatomy lecture, Emily struggled to focus on the professor's words. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket, another message from her mother, the 10th since Saturday night. She ignored it, just like all the others. "Miss Spencer," the professor's voice cut through her thoughts. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the relationship between the brachial plexus and median nerve." Emily felt her face flush as she fumbled with her textbook. Before she could respond, another student spoke up. "Probably too busy counting her trust fund to study," someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. A few snickers rippled through the lecture hall. Emily's hands clenched around her pen. She'd earned her place here through hard work and merit. She'd won scholarships, worked cleaning jobs, saved every penny. The fact that her newly discovered father was wealthy didn't change any of that. After class, she escaped to her favorite sanctuary, the small art studio she shared with 3 other students. But even here she found her peace disturbed. Her paintings from the exhibition had been returned, but something was different. New art supplies filled her workspace, professional grade oils in every color imaginable, brushes she'd only dreamed of owning, canvases of the finest quality. A cream-colored envelope sat propped against an elegant wooden easel she definitely hadn't owned yesterday. Inside, she found a handwritten note. "Dear Emily, these tools are not meant to buy your forgiveness or acceptance. They are simply a recognition of your talent, which is entirely your own. I saw your work at the exhibition, not as a father, I haven't earned that title, but as someone who recognizes genuine artistry when he sees it. You have a gift that deserves to be nurtured with the best materials available. I understand if you want nothing to do with me, but please don't let my presence in your life cast doubt on your achievements. You've earned every success through your own merit. If you're willing, I would very much like to tell you my side of the story. No pressure, no expectations, just truth, which you deserve more than anyone. Alexander Blackwood P.S. The gallery director mentioned you need studio space for your upcoming regional exhibition pieces. I've arranged for you to have access to a private studio in the arts building. The key is enclosed. Use it or don't, it's entirely your choice. Emily stared at the key attached to the note. It was exactly what she needed. Her shared studio was too cramped for the larger pieces she'd been planning, but accepting it felt like opening a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't her mother, but a number she didn't recognize. The message was simple. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding. When you're ready, I'll be at the Clifton Suspension Bridge Cafe every morning this week, 8 a.m. No pressure." A.B. Emily walked to the window, looking out over the university grounds. Students hurried between buildings, their lives uncomplicated by suddenly appearing fathers and family secrets. In the distance, she could see the suspension bridge spanning the Avon Gorge, a Victorian masterpiece of engineering and determination. She thought about her mother, probably sitting in her practice right now, worried sick. About Uncle Robert, who'd been more of a father than anyone. About Alexander Blackwood, waiting in a cafe with answers to questions she'd carried her entire life. The new easel caught her eye again. It was beautiful, exactly the kind she would have chosen for herself, but it was also a symbol of everything that had changed in her life. Could she accept these gifts without accepting him? Could she hear his story without forgiving him? Her reflection in the window looked back at her, a young woman at a crossroads. In her face, she could now see traces of both her parents, her mother's determination and, yes, her father's strength. The thought no longer filled her with anger, just a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. She picked up one of the new brushes, testing its weight in her hand. The bristles were perfect, the balance exact. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way to accept the tools without accepting the guilt behind them. To hear the truth without letting it define her future. The key felt heavy in her pocket as she packed up her supplies. Tomorrow morning, the suspension bridge would be beautiful in the early light. Perhaps it was time to build some bridges of her own. Chapter 7. Morning Light. The Clifton Suspension Bridge emerged from the morning mist like a ghost ship, its iron railings dripping with dew. Emily stood at the cafe entrance, watching Alexander Blackwood through the window. He sat alone at a corner table, absently stirring a cup of coffee while reading through what appeared to be business documents. He looked smaller somehow, more human than the corporate titan she'd researched online. The cafe door chimed as she entered. Alexander looked up, hope and uncertainty warring on his face as he quickly gathered his papers. Emily approached the table slowly, her heart thundering in her chest. "You came," he said softly, standing to pull out a chair for her. "I haven't decided if I'm staying," Emily replied, but sat down anyway. A waitress appeared immediately, and Emily ordered a chai latte, buying herself time to gather her thoughts. "How are the new art supplies?" Alexander asked after a moment of awkward silence. "They're lovely," Emily admitted, "but unnecessary. I was doing fine with what I had." "I know you were. Your work proves that." Alexander's voice was earnest. "I wasn't trying to buy your attention, Emily. I've missed so much. 20 years of birthdays, achievements, dreams. I can't make up for that with art supplies, I know that. But I wanted to do something, anything, to support your talent." The waitress returned with Emily's drink. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, studying the man across from her. "Why didn't you come to the cafe that day, when Mum was waiting to tell you about me?" Alexander's face clouded with old pain. The Singapore deal was falling apart. My investors had threatened to pull out, which would have meant bankruptcy for the company and unemployment for hundreds of people. The emergency meeting was called with just hours' notice. He paused, running a hand through his grey-streaked hair. "I tried to call Catherine, but mobile phones weren't what they are now. When I finally reached my office, they told me she'd already left." "So you just gave up? Never tried to find her?" "I did try, but Catherine had changed her number, moved flats. Nobody would tell me where she'd gone. I thought—" He swallowed hard. "I thought she'd decided I wasn't worth waiting for. By the time I'd stabilized the company and could return to Bristol, months had passed. I convinced myself she'd moved on, that it was better to let her live her life without me complicating things." Emily took a sip of her latte, letting the spicy warmth steady her. "She never moved on, you know. She never married, never even dated seriously. Uncle Robert says she threw herself into her studies, into building her practice, into raising me. Your uncle, he's been good to you both. The best," Emily said firmly. "He was there for every important moment in my life. School plays, art shows, graduation. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with my homework, gave me my first set of proper paints. He's my father in every way that matters." Alexander flinched slightly, but nodded. "I'm glad you had him. I'm glad Catherine had support. I never meant to abandon her, Emily. I made choices I thought were right at the time. Choices I've regretted every day since. Why come back now? Why not years ago? Honestly, I didn't know about you until I saw my ring on your finger. The moment I recognized it, everything changed. My whole world shifted on its axis." He pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph. "I've carried this for 20 years. Emily took the photo carefully. Her mother looked so young, laughing at something while Alexander gazed at her with obvious adoration. The emerald ring gleamed on her finger. "I designed that ring myself," Alexander said quietly. "Worked with an old jeweler in Bath for months to get it perfect. The emerald reminded me of the first time I met your mother, when she was wearing a green dress at a university dance. I thought—" His voice caught. "I thought we'd have forever to make memories like that. But your career came first," Emily said, but the words held less bite than before. "Yes, and that was my greatest mistake. I've built a successful company, helped develop technologies that have changed lives, but I missed the most important thing of all, being there for the people I loved." Emily studied the photograph again. "Mum has one just like this, hidden in her bedside drawer. I found it once when I was little. She told me it was from an old movie." Alexander smiled sadly. "We were young and in love. Everything seemed possible then." He hesitated before continuing. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, Emily, but I'd like to know you, if you'll let me. Not as some sort of replacement for Robert, I know that's impossible, but as someone who wants to understand who you are now, who you want to become. I'm still angry, Emily admitted. At you, at Mum, at this whole situation. But, she traced the outline of her mother's young face in the photograph. I have questions, things I've wondered about my whole life, and maybe you're the only one who can answer them. Ask me anything, Alexander said. I promise to tell you the truth, no matter how difficult. Emily took a deep breath. Tell me about the day you met my mother. As Alexander began to speak, the morning sun finally broke through the mist, illuminating the bridge that had stood strong through countless storms, its foundations unshaken by the waters below. Chapter 8. Ripples of Change. Catherine sat in her office, staring at the empty chair where Emily usually sat during their weekly lunches together. For the third week in a row, the chair remained vacant. Her daughter's silence weighed heavily on her heart, broken only by brief text messages confirming she was safe and attending her classes. The emerald ring sat on her desk, returned by Emily the night of their confrontation. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, it seemed to mock her with memories of younger, more hopeful days. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Dr. Spencer? Karen, her receptionist, poked her head in. Your brother's here to see you. Robert entered before Catherine could respond, his face set in lines of concern. You look terrible, Kath. Thank you for that astute medical observation, she replied dryly. I assume you're here about Emily? She's been staying at my flat, Robert confirmed, settling into the patient chair. She's processing things in her own way. You need to give her time. Time? Catherine laughed without humor. She's having breakfast with him right now, did you know that? At that cafe by the bridge. Robert's expression darkened. You could have prevented this, Kath. If you'd just told her the truth years ago. Don't. Catherine's voice was sharp. Don't you dare tell me what I should have done. You weren't there, Robert. You didn't see how devastated I was when he didn't show up that day, how scared I was about raising a child alone. Every decision I made was to protect Emily. And now? What's protecting her from his influence now? Robert leaned forward. He's already trying to buy her affection with expensive art supplies. Next, it'll be offers to fund her medical school, to open doors in her career. Is that so terrible? Catherine interrupted. For her to have opportunities. Robert stared at his sister in surprise. You can't be serious. After everything he did, you mean choosing his career over a relationship? Following his ambitions? Catherine picked up the emerald ring, turning it in the light. Tell me, Robert, how is that different from what I did? I threw myself into my studies, into building this practice. I chose to be a single mother, to keep Emily's existence from him. That's different. You did it for Emily. Did I? Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. Or did I do it because I was hurt and proud? Because I couldn't bear the thought of him pitying us, of him feeling obligated to help? Before Robert could respond, Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Had breakfast with Alexander. He told me about how you met at the university dance, about your first date at the botanical gardens, about the night he gave you the ring. Why didn't you ever tell me those stories? Catherine's hands trembled as she showed the message to Robert. She signs her texts M, usually. She only uses her full name when she's upset with me. He's manipulating her with romantic stories about the past, Robert said firmly. You can't let him rewrite history. Is it rewriting if it's true? Catherine stood, walking to the window that overlooked the busy Bristol street below. He did meet me at that dance. I was wearing a green dress I'd borrowed from my roommate. He did take me to the botanical gardens where we talked until they closed. And when he gave me this ring, she closed her fingers around the emerald. It was the happiest night of my life, until Emily was born. Catherine, Robert's voice was gentle now. You're not thinking of forgiving him. Forgiving him? I forgave him years ago, Robert. What I haven't done is forgive myself. She turned back to her brother. Emily deserved to know her father. Whatever his faults, whatever his choices, she had a right to know where she came from. Instead, I let my own hurt pride deny her that knowledge. You were protecting her. No, Catherine cut him off. I was protecting myself, and now I might lose her anyway. Another text buzzed. Going to look at the private studio space he arranged at uni. Don't worry, Uncle Robert's coming with me. But Mum, I think I understand a little better now. About you and him. About choices and consequences. Can we talk? Really talk? Tonight? Catherine showed the message to Robert, who read it with a frown. You're really going to let him back into your lives? I'm going to let Emily make her own choices, Catherine replied. She's not a child anymore, Robert. And maybe it's time we all stopped living in the shadow of choices made 20 years ago. She picked up her phone to reply to Emily, then hesitated. Will you still be there for her? Even if she chooses to have a relationship with him? Robert's face softened. Of course I will, I'm her uncle. That doesn't change just because she's getting to know her father. He stood and hugged his sister. And I'll be here for you too, whatever you decide. Catherine typed her response. Dinner at home tonight. I'll cook your favorite lasagna. Bring your appetite and your questions. I promise to answer everything honestly this time. The emerald ring caught the light again as she set it carefully in her desk drawer. Some things, she realized, were meant to be passed down, not just the physical objects, but the stories behind them. The truths, however complicated, that shaped their family's history. Outside her window, the autumn sun painted Bristol in shades of gold and amber, a reminder that even the most steadfast things changed with the seasons. Chapter 9. Canvas of Change. The private studio space transformed Emily's art. With room to breathe, to really stretch her creative wings, her paintings grew bolder, more ambitious. The piece she was working on now dominated the room, a triptych that would form the centerpiece of her regional exhibition submission. She stepped back, studying the first panel with a critical eye. It showed the Clifton Suspension Bridge at dawn, but rendered in a style that merged realism with emotion. The second panel was nearly complete, depicting the same view at midday. The third canvas remained blank, waiting for dusk to complete the story. That's extraordinary, a voice said from the doorway. Emily turned to find her mother standing there, looking somewhat uncertain. Thanks, Emily replied, wiping her hands on her paint-stained apron. I didn't expect you until later. I finished with my last patient early. Catherine moved closer to examine the paintings. The light. It reminds me of the way your father used to photograph the bridge. He was quite good with a camera, though he never pursued it seriously. It still felt strange to hear her mother talk about Alexander so openly. Their dinner conversation 3 weeks ago had opened floodgates of stories and memories. Some bitter, some sweet, all part of a history Emily was slowly piecing together. He mentioned the photography, Emily said, mixing a new shade of blue on her palette. Said he gave it up when he moved to Singapore, too busy building his empire. Catherine touched the edge of the unfinished canvas gently. We all make sacrifices for our dreams. Sometimes we choose correctly, sometimes we don't. Is that why you're really here, Mum, to talk about choices? Actually, I came to invite you to dinner, both of you. Catherine's words hung in the air between them. Emily's hand stilled on her brush. Both of us. You mean... Alexander called this morning. He's delaying his return to London. Says he wants to be here for your exhibition next month. Catherine straightened a jar of brushes unnecessarily. I thought, well, if he's staying, perhaps we should try to act like adults about this situation. Uncle Robert won't like it. Uncle Robert will survive. Catherine's tone was firm. He's agreed to come too, actually. Says someone needs to keep the peace. Emily set down her palette, studying her mother's face. Are you sure about this, having everyone together? No, Catherine admitted with a small laugh. But I'm sure about you, about wanting to support you. If having a relationship with your father is important to you, then I need to accept that. We all do. Emily wrapped her arms around her mother, not caring about the paint stains on her apron. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Catherine said wryly. Wait until you see me try to make conversation with your father about his corporate takeovers over roast beef. They both laughed, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged studio. Then Emily grew serious. He's not what I expected, you know. Alexander. He listens, really listens. When I talk about art or medicine or my dreams, he doesn't try to direct the conversation or offer solutions. He just wants to understand. He always was a good listener, Catherine said softly. It was one of the first things that attracted me to him, that and his ridiculous determination to succeed at everything he attempted. Like father, like daughter, apparently. Emily gestured to her paintings. The gallery director says these could win the regional exhibition, could lead to opportunities in London. London? Catherine's voice held a note of concern. That's quite far. I'd still be at university here, Emily assured her. But having connections in the London art world, it could mean being able to support myself through medical school with my art instead of cleaning offices. A noise from the doorway made them both turn. Alexander stood there, looking apologetic. I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a meeting in the building and thought I'd stop by, but I can come back. No, stay, Catherine said, surprising both Emily and herself. Actually, we were just talking about dinner. Friday night, at my house. A proper family dinner if you're free. Alexander's eyes widened slightly. Yes, I'd like that very much. Good. Catherine gathered her bag. 7 o'clock. Don't be late this time. The gentle teasing in her voice took any sting out of the words. As she passed Alexander in the doorway, she paused. The photographs you took of the bridge. I still have them, you know, in an album somewhere. The ones from that summer morning, when we watched the sunrise. Yes. Catherine's smile was tinged with nostalgia. Emily's captured the same light in her paintings. She has your eye for detail. After Catherine left, Alexander moved to study the triptych more closely. Your mother's right. These are extraordinary. The way you've caught the changing light. I'd like to hear about those photographs sometime, Emily said, picking up her brush again. About watching the sunrise with Mum. About all the moments that led to, well, to me. Alexander's smile was warm. I'd like that too, but first, he gestured to the blank third canvas. Tell me about your vision for dusk. What story are you trying to tell with these paintings? As Emily explained her artistic process, she felt something shift and settle in her heart. The studio felt fuller somehow, warmer, as if the space itself was expanding to accommodate these new relationships, these tentative bridges being built between past and present. Through the studio's large windows, the afternoon sun painted Bristol in shades of amber and gold, a preview of the dusk she had yet to capture on canvas. Chapter 10. Shadows Before Dawn. The family dinner started awkwardly, with Robert and Alexander exchanging stilted pleasantries while Catherine busied herself in the kitchen. Emily sat at the dining room table, watching the adults in her life navigate this new territory with all the grace of novice tightrope walkers. The roast smells wonderful, Alexander offered, helping Catherine set dishes on the table. Emily's favorite, Robert said quickly, as if claiming territory. Catherine always makes it for special occasions. Actually, Emily interrupted, I suggested shepherd's pie, but Mum insisted on roast beef, said it was more proper for a formal dinner. Catherine shot her daughter a look that clearly said, not helping. But the moment of honesty seemed to break some of the tension. They settled around the table, passing dishes and making cautious conversation about safe topics. The unseasonably warm weather, the latest developments in Bristol's city centre, Emily's upcoming exhibition. The triptych is really coming together, Alexander said, carefully cutting his meat. The play of light across the 3 canvases is remarkable. You've seen it? Robert asked, surprise evident in his voice. Alexander's been helping me with some technical aspects, Emily explained. His photography experience has been useful for understanding how light changes throughout the day. Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Photography? Just a hobby, Alexander said quickly. From years ago. He used to photograph the bridge, Catherine added, then looked surprised at herself for contributing to the conversation. At different times of day, different weather conditions. He was quite talented. I didn't know that, Robert said slowly, looking between his sister and her former partner. There's quite a lot we don't know about each other, Alexander acknowledged. 20 years is a long time. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Emily looked between the adults, seeing the weight of those years in their faces. Then Catherine did something unexpected. She laughed. Do you remember, she said to Alexander, that time we tried to photograph the bridge during that terrible storm? Your expensive camera got completely soaked. Alexander's face lit up with the memory. And we had to hide in that little cafe until the rain passed. The owner took pity on us and gave us free hot chocolate. The Sugar Cube Cafe, Catherine nodded. It's still there, actually. Emily loves their hot chocolate too. Best in Bristol, Emily agreed, watching this exchange with fascination. Some things don't change, Robert mused, then added more quietly, "And some things do." The rest of the dinner passed more comfortably, with stories and memories flowing more freely. Emily watched her mother gradually relax, saw Alexander's genuine interest in every detail of their lives, noticed Uncle Robert's protective stance softening slightly. After dessert, Emily excused herself to answer a call from a classmate about their upcoming presentation. When she returned, she found the adults in the living room, looking at old photographs spread across the coffee table. "I found these while cleaning last week," Catherine was saying, pointing to a particular image. "This was the day we first met Emily's art teacher. Remember, Robert? She was so tiny, barely able to hold a paintbrush." "Mrs. Henderson," Emily said, joining them. "She still asks about you, Mum. Says you were the only parent who actually listened during the parent-teacher conferences." "I had to," Catherine smiled. "You were so passionate about art even then. I wanted to understand what inspired you." Alexander picked up another photograph, Emily at her first art show, age 12, standing proudly beside a watercolor of the Bristol Harbour. "I've missed so much," he said softly. "Yes, you have," Robert agreed, but his tone held less anger than before. "But you're here now." "About that," Alexander straightened in his chair. "I've been meaning to tell you all something. The merger that brought me to Bristol, I've decided to restructure it. Instead of moving the operations to London, we're going to maintain the headquarters here in Bristol." "You're staying?" Emily's voice was quiet. "If that's all right." Alexander looked around the room, his gaze lingering on Catherine. "I've realized some things are more important than corporate expansion. Some opportunities only come once in a lifetime." The moment was interrupted by Emily's phone ringing again. "Sorry, it's Lisa again. We're presenting our research project tomorrow, and she's panicking about the slides." "The presentation at the medical conference?" Catherine asked. "The one about innovative approaches in pediatric dentistry?" "That's the one. We're the only undergraduate team selected to present. It's kind of a big deal." "You'll do wonderfully," Catherine assured her. "What time is the presentation?" Alexander asked. 9 a.m. in the main conference hall at the Marriott," Emily replied, then added hesitantly, "You're all welcome to come if you want." "Wouldn't miss it," Robert said immediately. "I'll be there," Alexander promised. Catherine simply smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. As Emily headed upstairs to take her call, she heard the adults' voices below, continuing to talk, to share, to bridge the gaps that time had created. The sound filled the house with a warmth she'd never known was missing, but in her room, as she tried to focus on Lisa's worried questions about their presentation, a strange dizziness swept over her. The stress of the past few weeks, the late nights finishing her paintings, the emotional upheaval of her changing family dynamics, it all seemed to crash over her at once. She sat heavily on her bed, the room spinning slightly. Tomorrow's presentation suddenly seemed impossibly daunting. How could she stand in front of all those medical professionals, try to prove she belonged in their world, when she could barely keep her own world from spinning out of control? Chapter 11. The Breaking Point. The morning of the medical conference dawned bright and clear, but Emily could barely appreciate it through her pounding headache. She'd barely slept, a combination of nerves and lingering dizziness keeping her tossing and turning all night. "You look awful, darling," Catherine said as Emily stumbled into the kitchen. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," Emily insisted, though the room was tilting slightly. "Just nervous about the presentation." "You've practiced it a dozen times," Catherine reminded her, pressing a cup of tea into her hands. "You know the material inside and out." "I know, but—" Emily swayed slightly, and Catherine's professional concern kicked in. "Sit down," she ordered, switching from mother to doctor mode. She pressed a cool hand to Emily's forehead. "You're burning up. There's no way you can present like this." "I have to," Emily protested. "Lisa and I are the only undergraduates selected. This could make a huge difference for my medical school applications. I can't let her down." The doorbell rang, and Catherine went to answer it, returning with Alexander and Robert in tow. They'd agreed to drive to the conference together, a show of family unity that now seemed ironic given the circumstances. "Emily's running a fever," Catherine announced before either man could speak. "She needs to rest, not give a presentation." "I'm fine," Emily insisted, standing up to prove her point. The kitchen spun violently, and she would have fallen if Alexander hadn't caught her arm. "Clearly not," he said softly, helping her back into her chair. Your health comes first. The medical community will understand. You don't understand, Emily's voice cracked. Everyone already thinks I'm only there because of you, because of your money and influence. If I don't show up today... Emily, Robert interrupted gently, nobody who knows you could think that. Your work speaks for itself. Does it? Emily looked at her uncle through fever-bright eyes. Half my classmates think I bought my way into the program. The other half are waiting for me to fail, and now I'm going to prove them right. A sudden wave of nausea forced her to stop talking. Catherine immediately went into action, gathering her medical bag from her home office. Robert, call the conference organizers, she directed. Alexander, help me get her to the sofa. She needs to lie down while I examine her. But Emily resisted their attempts to move her. The presentation. Lisa's waiting. Our research. I'll call Lisa, Alexander offered. What if we recorded your part of the presentation? You could rest while we set up the equipment, then film it when you're feeling a bit stronger. We could send it to the conference, have Lisa present it alongside your portion on video. That's actually a good idea, Catherine said, checking Emily's pulse. It shows commitment while also acknowledging your health needs. Very professional. The conference organizers have agreed to delay your slot until 11, Robert reported, returning from his phone call. They were very understanding. Apparently, the chairman's daughter is a fan of your artwork. Emily looked between the three adults, seeing their genuine concern, their desire to help. For the first time, she felt the strength of having a complete family supporting her. Okay, she conceded, letting her mother guide her to the living room sofa. But I need my presentation notes and my laptop, and... I'll get your materials from your room, Robert offered. I'll handle the recording equipment, Alexander added. I still remember a thing or two about lighting and camera angles. Catherine settled Emily on the sofa, taking her temperature and checking her symptoms. Probably a combination of stress, exhaustion, and a viral infection, she diagnosed. Nothing serious, but you need rest and fluids. As her family moved around her, working together to solve the crisis, Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks. What's wrong, darling? Catherine asked, wiping her daughter's face with a cool cloth. Nothing, Emily managed a weak smile. Everything. I never knew it could be like this. All of you, working together, helping me. That's what families do, Robert said, returning with her laptop. Even complicated, messy, imperfect families like ours, Alexander added, setting up his camera equipment. Catherine squeezed Emily's hand. Especially those. Over the next hour, they transformed the living room into a makeshift presentation space. Alexander's expertise with lighting made Emily look professional despite her illness. Catherine's medical knowledge helped manage her symptoms enough to film clearly. Robert's steady presence kept her calm, and when Lisa arrived, worried but supportive, she found not a crisis but a family united in purpose. The presentation was recorded in segments, allowing Emily to rest between takes. It wasn't perfect. Her voice was occasionally hoarse and she had to stop several times when dizziness overwhelmed her. But somehow, those imperfections made it more real, more human. You've done it, Catherine announced as they finished the final segment. Now, young lady, it's straight to bed for you. But the conference, Emily protested weakly. I'll handle everything at the conference, Lisa assured her. With this recording and our slides, we'll knock their socks off. As Robert helped Emily upstairs to her room, she overheard Alexander and Catherine talking quietly. Thank you, Catherine was saying, for the camera suggestion, for helping. You're good in a crisis. I've had practice, Alexander replied, though usually with corporate emergencies, not family ones. This was different. Better. Emily smiled as she drifted off to sleep, their voices blending with Uncle Robert's quiet humming as he arranged her pillows. For the first time since discovering the truth about her father, she felt completely, unconditionally supported. Sometimes, she realized, it took a crisis to show you what was truly important. Chapter 12. Dawn's Promise. 3 weeks later, the St. Nicholas Market buzzed with excitement. The historic building had been transformed into an elegant gallery space, with Emily's triptych of the suspension bridge taking pride of place in the central hall. The same spot where she'd first encountered Alexander now showcased her artistic vision to the world. It's perfect, Catherine said, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. a nervous habit Emily recognized from childhood. Though I still can't believe Alexander bought the market building. Not bought, Emily corrected, straightening a frame that didn't need straightening. Just rented it for the exhibition and helped establish the permanent gallery space for local artists, which just happens to include a fully equipped studio for a certain talented young artist, Robert added, but his tone was teasing rather than accusatory. The past few weeks had brought changes none of them had expected. Emily's video presentation at the medical conference had been a surprising success, with several doctors commenting that her honest handling of presenting while ill showed exactly the kind of dedication and adaptability needed in medicine. She'd received 2 preliminary offers for medical school interviews, along with an invitation to publish their research. Her recovery had brought the family closer together. Catherine and Alexander had begun talking more, not just about Emily, but about their shared past and separate lives. Robert had gradually accepted Alexander's presence, especially after seeing how he'd handled Emily's illness. "They're ready for you," Lisa appeared, tablet in hand. "The press wants photos of the artist with her work. And Dr. Winters from the conference is here. She's especially interested in the connection between your art and your medical studies." Emily smoothed her dress, the same shade of green as her mother's emerald ring, which once again graced her finger. "Will you all come with me? I'd like to have my family there." The 4 adults exchanged glances, then moved to surround her supportively. As they walked towards the waiting journalists, Emily saw Alexander slip his hand into Catherine's. Her mother tensed for a moment, then relaxed, a small smile playing at her lips. The questions flew fast, about her inspiration, her technique, her plans for the future. Emily answered them all confidently, drawing strength from her family's presence. "And what about the market space?" one reporter asked. "We understand it's being converted into a permanent cultural center." "Yes," Emily smiled. "The Emily Spencer Gallery and Cultural Center will provide space for local artists to exhibit their work, particularly students and emerging talents. We're also establishing a scholarship fund for aspiring medical students who pursue artistic endeavors." "We?" The reporter raised an eyebrow. "My father and I," Emily said simply, watching Alexander's face light up at the word father. "We believe in nurturing both the scientific and artistic sides of human nature." Later, after the crowds had thinned and the family shared a quiet moment in front of the triptych, Catherine touched the final panel gently. "The dusk view. It's different from what you originally planned, isn't it?" Emily nodded. "I changed it after I was ill. See how the bridge lights are coming on? How they reflect in the water. I wanted to show that sometimes the most beautiful moments come just before dark, when everything seems uncertain. That's when you need bridges the most, between day and night, between past and present, between people. Between family members," Robert suggested softly. "Exactly." Emily looked at her uncle gratefully. "The lights guide you home, no matter how long you've been away." Alexander cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "Speaking of home, Catherine, I've been meaning to ask. That cafe where we used to watch the sunrise, the Sugar Cube." Catherine's voice held a hint of amusement. "What about it? I thought perhaps tomorrow morning, for old time's sake. Only if you promise to actually show up this time," Catherine teased, but her eyes were soft. "I was thinking we could all go," Alexander suggested. "As a family, watch the sun rise over the bridge." Emily could bring her sketchbook. "I'd like that," Emily said quickly before her mother could respond. "Maybe make it a weekly tradition? Sunday sunrise at the Sugar Cube?" Robert chuckled. "Well, if you're making it a tradition, I suppose I'd better come too. Someone has to make sure the hot chocolate meets our family's high standards." As they laughed together, Emily studied her completed triptych. Dawn, day, and dusk. 3 views of the same bridge, each telling its own story while forming part of a greater whole. Just like her family, she realized. Different perspectives, different experiences, all connected by bonds that had proved stronger than time or distance or misunderstanding. Through the market's Victorian windows, the setting sun painted Bristol in shades of gold and purple. Soon it would be dark, but Emily wasn't worried. She knew now that every dusk held the promise of dawn, and every ending could also be a beginning. She touched her mother's ring, feeling the smooth emerald under her fingers. Some things were meant to be passed down, not just jewelry or artistic talent or medical ambitions, but the capacity for forgiveness, for growth, for love. These were the true bridges that spanned the gaps between hearts, between years, between what was lost and what could still be found. Tomorrow morning they would watch the sun rise together. For now they stood in the gentle dusk light, a family portrait finally complete, their shadows merging into one on the gallery wall behind them.